All right, good morning. Today we're going to talk about the advantages of franchising. And there's three categories or advantages we're going to talk about. It provides a better mechanism for selecting and offering incentives to outlet operators and salaried employees. It's an efficient mechanism for obtaining human and financial resources for growth. And it's a lucrative business model and can generate financial returns at relatively low risk for the franchisor. So selecting and offering incentives to outsiders. There's a term called adverse selection, the tendency of people with lesser abilities to put themselves forward as candidates for jobs more often than the overall population. And that is happening a lot right now. There are so few jobs out there that people will submit a resume or try to find a job that they know they're not qualified for just because they need a job. So in this case, the franchisor, all they have to do is select that one good person to run that franchise outlet, then all of the responsibility for hiring the other 40, 50, depending on what industry you're in, people falls upon the franchisee. It's expensive and time for firms to find who actually has the needed skills and abilities. Once again, by franchising, that is transferred to the franchisee, and they're the one that has to spend all the time and money investing and trying to find human capital. All right, better incentives for operators. Shirking. It's when a person does not put forth maximal effort because his or her compensation will be the same regardless of how hard she works. Once again, go back to my manager example. A manager is going to make $1,000. It doesn't matter how much business they do. On the other hand, that franchisee can make as much money as that business can generate. So they're going to be much more incentivized than a manager to maximize profits. Franchisees have stronger incentives to innovate than a salaried employee. And go back to the filet of fish. And I'll tell you a story that Hardee's is very strong in the Carolinas, and there's a group, Bodie Knoll, who own about 300 Hardee's in the Carolinas, and most of you, if you're college age now, won't remember, but there was a time when McDonald's, Hardee's, Burger King did not sell breakfast. It was just a lunch and dinner business. And Bodie Knoll, knowing that in the Carolinas breakfast was very prominent, decided that they wanted to sell breakfast. So they contacted Hardee's and said, hey, we want to sell breakfast. And Hardee's told them, no, you cannot. And so Bodie Knoll went ahead and started selling breakfast. And after some success, Hardee's came back and said, wow, what a great idea. I think we'll do that throughout the company. And later on, McDonald's followed suit. Burger King now followed suit. And at one time, Wendy's did put breakfast in some of their stores, and now since then, they have gone back and conceded that market to the others and have gotten out. So if the franchisee shirks, the franchise sales and profits fall. So once again, much more incentive for the franchisee than there is a manager. Franchisees have an incentive to set a higher pace for work among their employees. Once again, more productive your people are, less your labor cost is, more money goes into your pocket. Also have an incentive to keep materials and labor costs down. And I can remember running my business and being a customer in fast food before I owned my business. I can remember going to a place and asking for ketchup and having the cashier reach their hand into the ketchup bag and throw about 20 ketchup packs in your bag, way more than you know you would need. And so as an owner of a business, we always wanted to get the customer what they wanted, but not more than what they wanted. So we had our cashiers ask, if they asked for ketchup, how many would you like? Better incentives for operators. Study average sales in franchise restaurants was 82% higher than non-franchise restaurants. And not hard for me to believe because those owners have an incentive to work it, to get out. And in my case, I was in, my first restaurant was in a town of 6,000 people. I tried to get to know everybody in that town. We did as business as many local people as we could, and it became a reciprocal thing where we did business with the locals, did business with us. So once again, much more incentive for an owner to work sales than a manager. In another study, shift managers in company outlets 9% more than shift managers in franchise outlets. A couple of reasons for that. One, the company generally has a larger financial backing than an individual franchisee might, so they can pay their people a little more. Number two, They don't have an owner in there. They have a manager, so they are trying to attract maybe a little bit better people. And in the franchise case, with being in the restaurant all the time, I could probably overcompensate for the quality of the employees sometimes just because I was in there working. So what about bonuses and stock options? They're good. I do, even for my manager in my franchise store, I did have her on a very attractive bonus package. I think incentives are good for all people, but it's still not like making 100% of the profit. And stock options, you have to be very careful, especially if you are a private business. When you go to sell, it becomes very sticky, and everything needs to be very, very well spelled out. And what if at some time you want to buy that person out? So I'm not a big fan of stock in private businesses, but if you do it, just make sure that you try to cover every contingency that you could think of if the person wants out, if you want to buy them out, etc. And also bonuses, one of the things they point out encourages outlet managers to focus on the short term. If they've got a bonus period coming up and they need to meet a certain sales goal, well, they may lower prices, run a sale, and get to that goal in their bonus, but that can also hurt your profitability. And I can remember in one situation, and this was not from a manager doing it, but Hardee's ran a very, very aggressive sale one quarter on, we sold our premium burger for 69 cents, and sales went through the roof, which meant Hardee's made a lot of money, and it was probably one of the worst months financially I had during my whole tenure with them. So got to be careful about cannibalizing the short term or trying to make the short term very, very good at the expense of the long term. Okay, usually franchising improves environmental scanning. Franchisees communicate directly with headquarters, not through layers of hierarchy. A manager for a restaurant would have to talk to their division or district manager, who would have to go to the division, who would then go to headquarters. Franchisees have a direct line to headquarters because they have so much money invested in that business. Franchisees are more likely to tell the truth than managers of company-owned outlets. We are going to tell the truth as a franchise owner because it affects our pocketbook. That manager, if they're getting paid a salary, might just become a yes person and really not want to take on a problem or try to solve it. It's not going to change the check. All right, so rely on franchising rather than company-owned when it's difficult and expensive to select people to operate outlets. Franchising provides an inexpensive and effective solution to selection problems, and use franchising rather than company-owned when outlet managers have an incentive to shirk or when you want local market adaptation. And I will mention one thing. In a lot of the franchises now, McDonald's is a good example, and I don't want to seem like I'm picking on McDonald's, but they're, I guess, a really good example of this. When you think about franchising, you think about having ownership by an individual. And in the case of me, at my peak, I had 3 restaurants, so I was pretty much involved, was in almost every day I was in all 3 restaurants. So I had a real ownership involvement. You take some of the places like McDonald's now, where many of the owners of McDonald's will have 20 or 30 restaurants. And in that case, it's almost you're losing the benefit of the franchisee sometimes, because with one owner and 30 stores, you have to set that up like a company, and you're going to have a manager in every store. You may have a district manager to check on several stores. So once again, you're kind of getting into the same structure that a company-owned outlet would be, how it would be run. So once again, I go back to Chick-fil-A. They only allow you to have 1 or 2. It keeps that ownership in those stores. So that's one of the things that you might want to consider if you ever decide to franchise your business, and that is how many stores, how many units would I allow a franchisee to have? And the other thing is companies like McDonald's, Wendy's, it's much easier for them to sell a franchise to existing franchisee because there's no cost involved. The person's already been approved. They have operation experience. So instead of McDonald's going 20 people to own 1 store apiece, it's just much easier for them to select 1 person and have them own 20 stores. But once again, in my opinion, you lose some of the value of having that own store when you start allowing people to own them. All right, so obtaining resources for growth, and if you look at Subway, and how they've grown over the last few years. They had 16 stores in 1994, 150 stores in 1980, and then they've just gone nuts since then. Part of the reason is because Subway is on the low end of what it costs to get involved. There's very little equipment. In most cases, you don't own your land or building. You do a lease. So startup costs are very low. So that's what makes Subway a very, very attractive franchise. And one of the things you need to be careful about Subway, though, they do not offer area protection, meaning if I open up a Subway at the corner of 3rd Street and 4th and somebody wants to open one down the block at 4th and 5th, then Subway very likely will sell them the right to open that store. So you've got to be careful, and once again, that's one of the things that you need to check in that FDD, your franchise disclosure document. What kind of protection do I have for my area? In the case of Hardee's, I had protection of a 3-mile radius. In my case, I didn't have to worry about it in a town of 6,000 and 8,000 people. But if you get into a big metropolitan area and there's that franchisor is going to want growth. They're going to want to open as many stores because they get paid on gross revenue. So once again, and Dunkin' Donuts is a good example. They are a franchise. And in most cases, they make you commit to open a minimum of 5 stores. So the people that have Tallahassee have made a commitment to open 5 restaurants, and that protects the franchisor so that they get maximum growth in the area, but it also protects the franchisee because they don't have to worry about somebody coming in and cannibalizing their business. All right, so why growth? First and foremost is brand name. The more your brand gets out there, the easier it is to sell franchises, kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more I get, the easier it is to sell because that brand obtains value. Obtain supply, bulk purchasing, I've already mentioned that, economies of scale. The reason McDonald's can sell a double cheeseburger for 99 cents is because they can make it for cheaper than that. You probably can't go to the store and buy the supplies to make it that cheap. It's based on their purchasing power. You recover fixed costs such as new recipes because you then get to spread that to multiple outlets, and you try to, as you're growing, you fill good locations before the competition does. Another reason for obtaining resources for rapid growth is capital acquisition. Franchises pay you a franchise fee and a royalty. Franchise fee is that upfront fee to cover your opening, and then that royalty is your revenue stream over the life of the contract. And franchisees pay startup costs, so setting up the store. So in my case, I had to buy my land, do all the site work, concrete, asphalt, driveway, striping, build my building, and buy my inventory. It costs the franchisor nothing once they, other than human capital that they had come and help me get set up. And so it allows a franchisor to avoid taking on a lot of debt. You're actually passing that on to your franchisee. So one of the things that some companies offer are passive investors. And some companies, Firehouse Subs, I know, if you're going to do a firehouse and a group of you get together, one of the owners in principle has to be involved in the day-to-day business. A passive owner would be somebody like, I know in the old days, Hardee's would try to find athletes, and I think Karl Malone was a good example, that would have a bunch of money but really wouldn't be interested in running the day-to-day business, so they would set them up, and that person would put in the capital, and they would hire somebody to run the business for them. As an investor, you need to be careful with that also. There's something that occurs that's called information asymmetry, meaning that that person that's running the business actually knows more about the day-to-day business than you do. So you're going to kind of be at a disadvantage if you're not involved in the business. Moral hazard, that entrepreneur will act in ways that harm the passive investor without the investor realizing it. Are they actually embezzling money out or making risky deals or doing risky things that could hurt the investor? And franchisees have much more information about the business and less risk, so I personally would advise you to be very, very careful about going into a situation where you are just going to passively invest in something and not being involved. And I can put it on a kind of a smaller level even. When I told you I own 3 restaurants. When I sold my first 2 in 1999 and moved back to Tallahassee, and I still had 1 restaurant in Dumas, Arkansas at the time. And with me being 600 miles away, a manager who had worked for me for 4 or 5 years ended up just running that restaurant in the ground because I wasn't there to hold him accountable. So got to be careful. If you invest money in something, you need to stay involved in the business. So other considerations about capital. Many firms are hard to finance because they have limited tangible assets. Some businesses, and most of you know the investing climate and the lending climate has changed very much in the last few years. I can take you back, and this is not a few years ago, but in '99 when I sold my business, the guy that bought me out was another Hardee's franchisee, and he was able to borrow 100% of the sales price of that deal. I can assure you, in today's market, you're going to have to come up with 20, if not 30% down, and if there's no tangible assets, then they may even make you come up with more money, because what that means, if something happens to the business and you have no assets to pledge, then that bank's going to be left holding the bag on the default on your loan. In the case of a restaurant, motel, you have an asset. It's either a building. In the case of a motel, they can sell that, and there's always going to be value for that. We'll tell you, in the restaurant business, the equipment, it was costing me about $250,000 to equip my restaurant, but if we were to close down, then used restaurant equipment, maybe 10, 20 cents on the dollar. So real estate is the one thing that generally does hold its value, and if you have a business that involves real estate, you usually can. That is a good asset to have, and banks will usually give you credit for that. More effective to sell franchises than go public and raise funds. Also, you keep control. And one of the things, and once again, Chick-fil-A, not technically a franchise, but one of the reasons that they don't go public, and I think we could all agree that if Chick-fil-A were to go public, they could raise a ton of money in an IPO. People would buy that stock like crazy. Chick-fil-A could raise all that money, go start building a lot of stores, which they are growing very slowly to try to keep their costs down. But the first thing that the stockholders would do would be they would want them to open on Sunday. And being as that goes against the core value of Chick-fil-A, that's one of the reasons that, and I never say never, but right now that's one of the reasons why they won't go public, is because they do not want that pressure from stockholders to open on Sunday. And once again, if you bring in venture capital, there's going to be risk involved, and where there's risk, they're going to want a big reward, and so you're going to have to give up part of the control of your company. So franchising, once again, a very good way to grow, using other people's money, acquiring capital, and yet maintaining control of your business. Human resource acquisition. Establishing operating outlets is time-consuming, and but fine, once you find that outlet, once you find out where you want to build a business, then it's also time-consuming to hire the other 40, 50, 60 people that you need to actually run that business. So franchising allows a firm's management to specialize in identify, selecting, and training franchisees, and then the franchisee has the responsibility of executing the rest of the business. And in most cases, though, the franchisor will have a real estate person, an HR person, so they're going to have staff involved, or staff that you have access to that with some expertise in those areas that can really help you as far as selecting the right location, hiring your people, etc. And that cost comes as part of your franchise fee. All right, so how do firms pick franchisee? If you have high managerial expertise and high capital, then that's pretty easy. That's highly desirable for franchisees. But if you have somebody maybe who has very, very good managerial experience, but it's low in capital resources, then a franchise that has capital, that might be a good fit for them. Once again, if you have somebody who has low capital, doesn't have a lot of money, but it's high in managerial expertise, then that might be acceptable to capital-scarce franchisors. All right, and see the slide on Panera Bread, and if you look at it, and one of the things that I haven't mentioned yet is when you go to own a franchise, many of them have financial requirements that you have to meet before they'll even talk to you. When I went through the Hardee's back in 1994, before they would even talk to me, you had to have a net worth of $800,000 and $300,000 liquid. What that means, net worth, is you take all your assets, and subtract your liabilities, that is what you owe. And so on paper, you had to be worth $800,000, and then you had to have $300,000 liquid, which is cash, stock, something that you could be turned into cash immediately. In my case, I did not quite meet that criteria, so I had to have my parents, who very graciously signed and went in on the license agreement with me. But Hardee's also was very good in that when I opened my second restaurant and they had seen the success we had in our first restaurant, that they did not require my parents to sign on the license agreement. But once again, if you're going to do some of these larger franchises, you're going to have to be financially secure. And when I first started doing franchising, and when I was even a franchisee, I didn't really understand that. But after you get in to the franchise, then you kind of understand. The two main reasons that businesses close is poor management and lack of capital. One of the reasons that the franchise requires you to have that net worth is they want you to be very well capitalized, so that if it takes a little while to get the business up and running, you're not going to run out of money. And also, once again, read your franchise development document very closely and talk to franchisees. In the cases of me with Hardee's, we had a flat grill, and that was how we cooked our burgers. We got bought out by Carl's Jr. in the middle of my tenure with Hardee's, and they came in and said, okay, all you guys are going to have to buy a charbroiler. That franchisor, according to your license agreement, can make you update your business. If you buy new equipment, if they go to a different brand or go to a different operation system, so they can make you make improvements. So once again, you need to be very familiar with your FDD, but that's one of the reasons that franchise is going to require you to have a net worth and liquid assets going into this business. All right, so relying on franchising rather than growing company-owned outlets when you want to grow quickly, and then rely on franchising rather than company-owned when you want to overcome financial and human resource constraint on the grounds of your firm. So basically, you're going to let other people grow the business. You're going to take a percentage of their sales in that royalty and get a franchising fee rather than go in debt or bring in venture capital. All right, so risk sharing and the business model. The franchisee's capital is at risk. When I opened that restaurant, I bought the land, built the building, and so if I went under, really Hardee's didn't lose anything in the deal. In the next statement, franchisors often buy back successful outlets and leave lesser outlets to franchisees. Don't put a lot of stock in that. They can't just arbitrarily buy you out. You have a license agreement with them. Once again, one of the very important things to check in your license agreement is what is the term of my agreement and what is the renewal process. In the case of Hardee's, I signed a 20-year agreement. So that means, and there's positives and negatives, and later on in the course we'll talk about the advantages of a long-term agreement versus a short-term agreement with renewal options. So in my case, for 20 years, the franchise fee couldn't, the royalty rate couldn't be changed, the advertising rate couldn't be changed, so you're locked in. If you have a 5-year agreement, at the end of that 5 years, then the company, unless you have a renewal option, that company might be able to say, well, we're just not going to renew your outlet. So you got to make sure you're protected. And in most cases, most companies do have that renewal option for you. So once again, do your homework. You can earn royalties on sales rather than profits, and geographic expansion provides diversification and limits legal liability and insurance costs. As a franchise owner, I had to have insurance that covered me, and you can pretty much be guaranteed if you own a business, at some point you're going to be sued. I owned my business for about 4.5 years. I was sued 4 times. The most common is slip and fall, and you see that happening a lot. But the good thing is when I got sued, I had insurance, liability insurance, and so all those lawsuits cost me nothing out of pocket, which is really wonderful. Now, what it says about the legal liability and insurance cost, when I got sued the first time, he sued me and he sued Hardee's, and Hardee's very quickly sent him a letter that said, you have no standing to sue us. BG Foods, which is my company, is operating a Hardee's, and you see the term DBA, doing business as a Hardee's, and so any claim you had will be with Mr. Garner, and Hardee's is very politely bowing out of this. And so they are actually, the corporate transfers that risk. You are operating using their name, but the corporate takes no liability in that. So, also very important, return on investment. 3 components. It's your revenues divided by the amount of capital invested plus your cost of generating revenues. So, one of the things to keep in mind about franchising, gross profit. If you are looking to maximize the amount of dollars you want to make, you don't want to do a franchise. You want to own every store yourself, and a good example of that, you guys are probably all familiar with Cracker Barrel. That is a perfect business that could franchise. They're all company-owned. The company owns all of those. Now, I do know also that they pay their managers very, very well. When you, matter of fact, I had a buddy that worked for them. He was making over $100,000. But you look at the scope of their business. They have a full retail shop in there plus a full restaurant. So, but once again, I would make the case that that would be a perfect scenario for a franchise owner to own, but their goal was to maximize profit dollars, so therefore the company owns all those stores. Steak and Shake is an example. All the company owns all the stores, and once again, their managers are paid very, very well. The advantage of franchising, you don't make as much pure profit, but your return on investment is greater, meaning the average amount of money you make for the dollars you invest is greater. So there's 2 ways to look at it. Do I want to maximize profit? If that's the case, then you would rather own the stores yourself. But if I want to go quickly and reduce my investment, reduce my risk, and increase my return on investment, then franchising is definitely a lucrative way to go. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the concept PODS, P-O-D-S, Portable On-Demand Storage. The guy that invented that concept from St. Pete, Florida, Peter Warhorst, and back in the around 99, 2000, he was going through the growth, and he was trying to figure out, am I going to do an IPO and raise money and go public with this, or am I going to franchise? And ultimately, he made the decision to franchise, which once again, just a way to grow the business. He was able to maintain control and not have to go through borrowing money, or in the case of IPO, raising money, and once again, giving up control. All right, so overall lesson, just kind of a recap, rely on franchising rather than company if you want to minimize risk. Rely on franchising rather than company if you want to generate high returns on investment. By cutting your investment and operating costs, you get a higher return on investment, but once again, your actual profit dollars, net profit dollars you make is going to be less, but it's with a lot less risk and a lot less of your money invested. Okay, so 3 main categories. Better mechanism for selecting and offering incentives to outlet operators, an efficient mechanism for obtaining human and financial resources, and a lucrative business model for generating financial returns at a relatively low risk. And you just got to weigh the advantages relative to what it is you're trying to accomplish and how you want to grow the business. Do I want to maintain control? And what's my debt? Do I want to go into debt, or do I want to maintain control? And that's the end of chapter 2.